Hello, ladies and gents. It's Justin Johnson. We're on the module DD316, Modern Political Ideas. We're on chapter 15, Personal Liberation. Bear with me. Personal liberation. The long road from gay rights to same-sex marriage in the UK and USA. Page 298. Not discriminated, persecuted much more strictly. Shara and do Urso. Further attempts in the UK to improve gay rights after 1967 were not successful. Although gay people become more visible, while the 1967 Act condemned public homosexuality, gay men and women become more vocal. Smith, 2012. Gay public spaces become part of public life. Plummer, 2001. Indeed, while not a philosophy of liberation, the 1967 Act can be seen as heralding as Weeks, 2011. Writes, the new generation of 1970s lesbian and gay activists acted as if they had been given new rights by law reform. Called white activists to come out at this time were both influenced by the 1967 Act of being the opposite of the Act's invention to keep homosexuality within the private domain. Illinois in 1961 became the first US state to decriminalise homosexuality by repealing its sodomy laws. Over the next few decades, more and more states also changed their laws, decriminalising same-sex consensual relationships, although not all states. Kansas, for example, legalised heterosexual sodomy, but not homosexual sodomy, and Arkansas went from decriminalising all sodomy to recriminalising homosexual sodomy after a backlash from religious groups. Cato Institute, 2003. It is, of course, important to note that sodomy is not representative of nor a feature of all male homosexual relationships, but decriminalising it has the effect of making gay male relationships legal, as it has never been illegal to be gay as such, just to engage in certain sexual acts. In 1969, the Stonewall riots took place in New York, heralding the beginning of the public gay rights liberation movement in the US. This movement was part of the wider liberation philosophy, with young gay people placing their struggle for reform within a wider context of dismantling racism and sexism and traditional ideas about sex and morality. Altman, 1980, describes this period of US gay activism as radical, involvement and openness and willingness to use confrontation tactics that were unknown before. He goes on to suggest that the rise of the youth-orientated rebelliousness in the 1960s in USA and Europe, which was far less willing to accept the sort of ferventiveness and self-hatred traditionally associated with gay life, alongside the development of the New Left. Counterculture and feminism were key cultural factors in the movement. In essence, people were fighting to become political citizens. Harvick Milk, US gay rights campaign, a politician and champion of gay visibility. Harvick Milk was one of the first openly gay men elected to public office in the US, winning a seat in the San Francisco Board and Supervisors in 1977. His reform agenda included protecting gay rights, but he also spoke out on wider issues of interest to women and racial and ethnic minorities. He was vocal about the need for gay people to be visible in their communities and in politics. In 1978, he was assassinated. Gay people will not win our rights by staying quietly in our closet. We are coming out to fight the lies, the myths, the distortions, or coming out to tell the truth about gays. Well, I am tired of the conspiracy of silence, so I'm going to talk about it, and I want you to talk about it. You must come out. The 1980s setbacks and gradual gains. After the improvement of public attitudes towards homosexuality of the 1960s and 1970s, among the middle classes at least, Wayside 1998, there was a backlash to so-called permissiveness. In the 1980s in the UK, 1987 Clause 28, enacted in the law in 1988 as Section 28 of the Local Government Act, banned local authorities from promoting homosexuality. This clause was seen by some as an unprecedented politicisation of the gay community in Britain. Sanderson 1995. And the response to left-wing Labour councillors and the assertion of gay rights. Sanderson 1995. It was also a reaction to the liberalism of many gay rights campaigners at this time, who represented and undermining the notion of the family. As Weeks 2000 notes, the clause restricted homosexuality to the 1967 interpretation. Anything more progressive was seen as a threat to the family. There were other political and legal setbacks in the 1980s in the UK, including the failure of the 1983 Sex Equality Bill, which attempted to outlaw discrimination in employment because of homosexuality. It was not the case that gay rights were rolled back at this time, but rather they were reined in, preventing further advancement rather than amending rights already gained. There were some successful reforms, those such as the extension of Sexual Offences Act to Scotland in 1980 and Northern Ireland in 1982. The latter was due to the European Commission for Human Rights ruling stating that the UK Conservative government position was illegal rather than the government itself pushing for the reform. The government found that it could rein in gay rights because public opinion had become more negative about homosexuality generally. Cited in Smith 2012, Wayside 1998, partly due to HIV and AIDS, and the fact that this was predominantly and wrongly thought of as a gay disease at the time. HIV/AIDS crisis was also used as evidence to support the argument that homosexuality was incompatible with normal family life. Pollock et al. 1993, right. Early media accounts of AIDS emphasised its association with a lifestyle outside of the morally acceptable cultural mainstream. The public-private dimension was once again resonant with the relationship between private sexual behaviour and public policy in conflict. Even the Labour Party distanced itself from gay rights for much of the 1980s due to the influence of its working class membership, before becoming more positive towards the end of the decade. Wayside 1998. Wayside 1998, page 32, notes that party leaders were more comfortable with tolerantly liberal views of sexual diversity and with fully inclusive views. The 1980s demonstrate, then, that gay liberation was a halting process rather than a linear one, with gains made at a slow pace and often in a hostile environment, with unexpected setbacks, including a record number of recorded offences for gross indecency in 1989, after a decline in mid-1970s to mid-1980s, itself coming after a previous high in the early 1970s as a result of increased prosecutions after the 1967 Act, which can partly be put down to moral panic over HIV/AIDS. Schwerer and 2017. Gay rights in the USA in the 1980s were also characterised by setbacks and gains. While in 1982, Maryland became the first state to outlaw discrimination because of sexual orientation, and more states decriminalised sexual relations between consenting male adults in this decade. As in the UK, HIV/AIDS dominated the political stage, negatively impacting public opinion, political attitudes and press coverage of gay men in particular. In 1986, the US Court of Appeal ruled that there is no such thing as a fundamental right to commit homosexual sodomy, and to hold that the act of homosexual sodomy is somehow protected as a fundamental right, it would be to cast aside millennia of moral teaching. The judges also noted that laws about homosexual conduct have ancient roots and therefore could not be implicit in the concept of liberty or deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition. The impact of conservative religious right was certainly felt in American politics in the 1980s and beyond. As Rayside 1998 writes, the Christian right had taken advantage during the Reagan and Bush years of opportunities opened up within the Republican Party. For the exercise of conservative political influence, Weeks 2000 also notes what he calls a new conservatism and rise of fundamentalist religion from the 1970s onwards focused on moral issues. AIDS become a focus of social concern at exactly the same time as his new politics was attempting to achieve a new cultural hegemony. We see then a battleground between liberal attitudes towards sexuality and more traditional conservative ones. Trias 2002 notes that while public opinion towards homosexuality improved between the 19th and late 1990s, in the 1980s it became more negative until this reversed. In the 1990s. However, while disapproval of homosexual behaviour increased in the 1980s, support for gay, lesbian, civil liberties, their right to teach, for instance, also increased as civil right issue, and a matter of fairness is key to greater acceptance generally. Despite the political atmosphere and accompanying legal impediments, gay people become more visible at this time. Anson and Fetner, 2008. Fired up by political, legal, and medical setbacks, reclaiming their sexuality and defining themselves as a valid and vibrant community of political citizens, using Taylor's 1922 understanding of recognition wherein marginalised groups receive equal rights and respect, rather than reluctant tolerance alongside recognition of their particular gay men and women, were on the way to recognition, although they weren't yet there yet. Page 304. The 1990s powerful campaigners and mixed public opinion. In the 1990s, public attitude towards homosexuality in the UK became more positive. Britt Socket, a 2001, citing Smith 2012, as did political attitudes, with visibility gained because of the struggles of the 1980s continuing to increase as Rayside writes. The balance of forces shifted from the late 1980s, demonstrating how much access and even influence activists had succeeded in gaining within mainstream political institutions. Alongside the increasing political influence of more assimilative campaigning organisations such as Stonewall, working within the political system itself to lobby for law reform and the radical direct action focused outrage, there was a mainstream of gay issue in the media, more positive press coverage within the context. The 1990s ushered in the start of modern progressive gay rights reform, with the lowering of the age of consent for gay men from 21 to 18. In 1994, this is what was not an easy win for campaigners, with many Conservative MPs opposing the change. In fact, a vote to lower the age of consent to 16, equal to the heterosexual age of consent, was lost. Despite the hostility of many Conservative MPs, it shouldn't be forgotten that it was the Conservative government who allowed a vote on the age of consent, a free vote to an amendment of Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. With the Conservative MP Edwina Covey leading the campaign in the House of Commons for a reduced age of consent, the campaign supported by MPs from all major parties. Interestingly, polling at the time of the age of consent vote showed that most of the public were in favour of the principle of equality. Far fewer supported 16 as age consent. Rayside 1998, once again it seems that it was sex that was upmost in many people's minds. People can be gay, but they can't do gay. Alice and Kitzinger, 2012, note that arguments made for reducing the age of consent were based on the equality argument. They also note, though this was one of the arguments used in the House of Commons and Lords against lowering the age of consent, principles of right and wrong take precedence over equality. There can be no equality between normality and abnormality, moral probability and sin. While there was no more legal gains, gay rights activists and pro-gay politicians prevented other regressive changes from happening. In 1991, successfully contesting the amendment to paragraph 16 of the Children's Act, which was designed to prevent homosexuals from fostering, adopting, and in the same year campaigned against various clauses of the Criminal Justice Act, leading to removal of three offences liable to harsher punishment. The government claimed that these clauses were not aimed at punishing gay men as such, but rather the protection of the public safety. The discussion at this time echoed that of the previous decades, arguments for and against the idea of equality, the private versus public dichotomy, the notion of the family and preoccupation in sexual acts rather than identity. Stonewall first outweighed two different ways to achieve liberation. Assimilation. Stonewall 1989 current and UK LGBT charity is primarily a lobbying organisation alongside the work it does in education and research through parliamentary lobbying. The charity successfully lobbied for the lowering of the age of consent, repeal of Section 28, and alongside other charities, institutions and individuals, the introduction of civil partnership. Radicalism outraged 1990 to 2011, of which Peter Tatchwell was a leading member, described itself as a broad-based group of queers committed to radical, non-violent direct action and civil disobedience to assert the dignity and human rights of queers, fight homophobia, discrimination and violence directed against us, affirm our right to sexual freedom. Choice and self-determination outraged 2018. The group specifically rejected what they called the assimilationist and conformist politics of the mainstream lesbian and gay rights movement. Outraged 2018b. They claim that direct action works and that they succeed in changing police priorities, for example, by invading police stations, following entrapment operations, and outing undercover officers. Here we have two different ways to achieve liberation: a more restrained approach, integrating and engaging with mainstream politics and politicians to press for change, the radical direct action aimed at forcing change. Both approaches can be successful and they are not mutually exclusive. Trier states that the public attitudes in the USA were towards homosexuality improved in the 1990s because of the liberalising effect of cohort turnover, wherein younger generation plays older generations of attitudes becoming generally more liberal, as well as intra-cohort change. Change within cohorts as people grow older, she notes. 2002, page 276. The public attitude towards homosexuality improved rapidly between 1988 and 1998, with a shift similar to the sexual revolution that occurred in attitudes towards premarital sex in the 1960s. In particular, those who were younger, less educated and less religious showed the greatest increase in approval of homosexuality in this period. In relation to education, she calls a cultural diffusion, with permissiveness trickling down from higher status to lower status groups. Trias 2002, page 280, in relation to religion, is down to secularization. Trias 2002. However, despite improved attitudes overall, as noted about the 1980s, public approval was soft, with support for rights-type issues stronger than those relating to behaviour. The be gay versus to do gay issue, once again, It is no surprise then that the 1990s were a mixed bag in terms of public policy in 1993. In 1993, President Clinton signed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, a policy that outlawed the harassment of closeted homosexuals in the military, but at the same time prohibited openly gay people from serving, something Wayside in 1998 attributes to the power and finances of the religious conservative right and their ability to mobilise grassroots supports on a huge scale. In 1996 also signed the Defence of Marriage Act, which banned federal recognition of the same-sex marriages. On the upside, in the same year, Hawaii became the first state to recognise the same-sex couples were entitled to the same privileges as opposite-sex ones, and in 1995, the Hate Crime Sentencing Act came into effect following US judges to impose harsher sentences. If victims were selected because of their sexuality and other factors such as race, gay men and women would have to wait about 20 years for a significant change in public policy. 62,000 rapid reform of same-sex marriage. In the late 1990s, 2,000 change happened rapidly between 1997 and 2010. UK Labour government lowered the age of consent for gay men to 16. It allowed same-sex couples the right to adopt a child as a couple. It lifted the ban on gay people serving the armed forces, banned discrimination in the workplace for gay people, repealed Section 28 and introduced civil partnership, among many other reforms. Much of this change was controversial, opposed by the Conservative opposition, as much of the press. Civil partnership fell short of the full same-sex marriage campaign for by some, but was also a useful compromise, considering that opposition to other gay rights reforms that had been passed by Labour. With the introduction of civil partnership recognition, whereas in marginalised groups receive equal rights and respect alongside recognition of their particularly attained in 1992, was inching closer. Although civil partnerships are not the same as marriage in the name or law, campaigners continue to campaign for full same-sex marriage. In the 2010s, a new Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition government carried on with the reforms began under Labour, introducing same-sex marriage in 2013, later in Scotland, and not yet in Northern Ireland by the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act. The fact that the Conservative Party and the leadership of David Cameron reserved its approach to gay rights, and that as so rapidly is of note, as the fact that many conservative politicians and members disagreed with his stance on same-sex marriage but stayed within the party. It shows that political ideologies such as conservatism are fluid. Conservatism is traditionally about continuity, stability and measured rather than radical change. Same-sex marriage could be interpreted as the opposite of that, but also be an epitome of it. Same-sex marriage boosts the ideas of the prestige of traditional relationships, and the family promotes stability and commitment and enhances marriage as a social and legal bond. Same-sex marriage is therefore not radical at all. It is conservative to its core. In 2010's recognition seemed closer than ever. Public opinion is certainly positive as it has ever been, with agreeing that the same-sex partnership are not wrong at all. Quadrupling from 1983 to 2016, 17.64%, with accepting rising from 2012 to 16 in particular, and an increase in every age cohort, attributed to growing rise of social liberalism. Of course, there is still a long way to go until 100% approval is reached. Significant change happened in the USA in the 2000s too. Lawrence, Texas 539 US 558 was a landmark case in the Supreme Court which struck down the anti-sodomy law in Texas, and thus by default similar laws in other states, meaning same-sex sexual activity become legal in every US state. The case overturned Bowers versus Hardwick 478 by ruling that the earlier case had defined liberty too narrowly, with intimate sexual conduct protected under the 4th Amendment. The idea of liberty then was essential to this reform. In its brief in support of Lawrence, the Cato Institute argued that not only did the anti-sodomy law break the liberty principle, it broke the equality principle. 2. For the 14th Amendment requires that the state protect the fundamental liberties of its citizens, and it do so on equal basis. Texas homosexual conduct law violates both prongs of the constitutional assurance. Following on from Lawrence v. Texas 2004, the legal same-sex marriage took place in Massachusetts after the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruled the same-sex couples had the right to marry. Lawrence v. Texas was quoted by the Massachusetts Court and its legal decision. Our obligation is to define liberty of all, not to mandate our own moral conduct. Lawrence v. Texas and other states followed allow other past constitutional amendments defining marriage as between a man and woman. After years of confusion and different practices in different states, in 2015, same-sex marriage finally became legal across the whole of USA after the US Supreme Court struck down a law prohibiting recognition of same-sex marriages in 2014. The United States, of course, appealed for the men's forces. Also referenced Lawrence v. Texas in relation to ban sodomy. Article 125, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, with the liberty interest recognised in Lawrence v. Texas, deemed to exist within the military too, although the specific context of the military meant that the ban still to be applied in certain circumstances, such as maintained behaviour. In September 2011, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell came into effect. It approved by President Obama. In 2013, Article 125 was amended to make consensual sodomy legal. All of this took place in the context of public attitude towards homosexuality becoming more liberal, with 7% of the Americans in 2017 saying homosexuality should be accepted by society, up from 51% in the 2006 Pew Research Center 2017. In 2018, 67% of Americans believe same-sex marriages should be legal, up from 21.7% in 1996. The same poll showed the Democrats were twice as likely as Republicans to support same-sex marriage, although support had still increased among the latter. The increase in support could partly be due to increasing visibility of same-sex marriage. But in the conclusion, on page 312, the political and social reform discussed in this chapter show that political ideas, theories and concepts, as well as ideologies, are key to personal liberation. The change that affects people's everyday lives and the ideas behind change intersect. Ideas are present in arguments for liberation as well as in arguments against liberation. With gay rights and later same-sex marriage, the political ideas of equality, rights recognition and citizenship are in play, alongside the ideologies of social liberation, liberalism and conservatism. The ideas do not just influence liberation, they are influenced by liberation. For example, the boundaries of political citizenship have changed over the years. Why did to include gay people? The idea of citizenship, what we mean by citizenship as a concept, has also changed to reflect this. It is also clear that people, ordinary everyday people, are central to change, reform and thus liberation must be driven, championed and campaigned for. It isn't easy, and small steps are often needed to lead to wider change. It is evident from looking at gay rights reform that it is difficult to isolate the impact of individual reforms. If one reform is linked to another, for example, it is unlikely that same-sex marriage would have happened in the UK when it did if a civil partnership reform had not softened public and political opinion 10 years earlier. While there has been a huge amount of change in the last few years, there are still some outstanding issues. At the time of writing this chapter, same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland is not yet legal. It is a devolved matter for Northern Ireland Assembly. Activists in the USA are not concerned that Donald Trump's presidency and change in the Supreme Court judges will negatively affect gay rights. While public opinion of same-sex marriage has become much more positive over the years, in the UK in 2014, nearly one-third of respondents to an Ipsos MORI poll disagreed with same-sex marriage just before it was legalised. The Ipsos MORI 2014 in the USA opposed legislation of same-sex marriage. One poll found that acceptance of homosexuality has decreased, with only 49% of respondents saying they were very or somewhat comfortable around gay people, down from 53% a year earlier. GLED 2018, this showed that while public opinion and social form generally interrelate, there will always be some people who disagree with the reform or who change their opinion over time. It also demonstrates the social form, it's not linear. In the 1980s, public opinion towards homosexuality became much more negative, allowing the introduction of laws such as Section 28. Could this happen again? Could gay liberation be rolled back or at least reined in, as it was in the 1980s? If public attitudes could progress, it seemed unlikely that there will be a wholesale change. While the polls discussed above often asked different sorts of questions, meaning comparison between polls and years is not always straightforward. There is no doubt that attitudes are much more positive overall. And even when there have been dips in the upward trajectory, has ultimately continued, as Week 2000 notes. The secularization of sex, the separation of sexual values from religious ones, alongside individualism, seems to ingrain to reverse. It can be argued, in fact, that when it comes to gay rights, social liberalism has won, with ideas divided in the 1980s now mainstream and part of a new consensus. Current 2018. Through reading this chapter, it should be clear that ideas at a micro or personal level can lead to liberation of individuals and groups. Of course, ideas at a micro level can also lead to repetition. Ideas inform how the public sees homosexuality, how people are treated socially and legally, and how liberated people are. Ideas are behind social forms and ultimately liberation or repression. But social forms also impact on ideas. If homosexuality is in itself an idea, it will be interesting to see the impact of same-sex marriage and other forms on it. Will homosexuality continue to exist, or will we define ourselves this way as autonomous with liberation? We are now on chapter 16